Okay, hi guys. Today I'm going to talk about how games are even made, and I'm going to make a very specific argument about how we as students should make them. Okay, let's start with something that seems completely unrelated. So how do we learn complex things? Well, we kind of have a formula or an algorithm, if you will. You have to have curiosity in something. For a lot of us, I'm sure we grew up playing video games. Um, so at some point, when we were younger, we thought, how do you make that? And so um, the trick is next, you have to maintain that curiosity with intentional exposure. Watch videos, read books, talk to people, um, just really engage with media. And the next step, I would say, is okay, so you've been interested in this subject for a while. Okay, cool. You know kind of the scope of its limits and like what you can do with it. Let's start theory crafting. Okay, let's come up with novel ways to do things. Let's, in the case of making a game, think about your favorite game. How did they do that? How could you make it more interesting? So on and so on. And the last step, and this is what sort of separates people who get really good at stuff versus who people who don't, is once you've reached a certain level of confidence, stability, resilience, you have taste and opinions about how your domain should be going. You can start to join a community. You can appreciate the theory craft of others, and you can keep the momentum going by consuming very complex content, right? Um, so let's talk more about games and how that applies to us. Basically, every single one of us in this room is somewhere on this diagram. Uh, we all started, many of us are still on the first step here. Learn the fundamentals. You need to learn math, art, design, you need to learn to program, so on and so on. And each one of us has different levels of skill. So from there, this is a bit of a jump, and it might be very intimidating. I know it was for me to jump, especially from 2D to 3D, is, well, then you've got to try out using a game engine or making a game from scratch, as the case may be. Now, I think it's very valuable to start by just copying. Um, I know the CD students have a lot of lectures how they shouldn't copy stuff, but for programmers, there's no such thing as plagiarism. It's yours if it exists and you find it and it works. So make something very simple and then learn exactly what's going on, like Pong, for example. Um, and then from there, you can develop an appreciation for why things are even fun in the first place and how they work and the systems on a deeper level. Now that you have that grounding in, well, we made something very simple, let's think about something more complex. And at that point, you may be asking yourself, what if I made a larger project, something that was not quite my dream game, but something closer to what I would, I don't know, play on itch or Steam or whatever. And from there, um, and by the way, that might be something you do in a class project. The classes we offer here are great ways to hold yourself accountable, to have people to work with, to get feedback, all things I'll talk more about later. And from there, you can get a really good idea of what you might want to specialize in, um, be it art, programming, maybe sound design, just whatever you want, really. And along the way, hopefully, you learn how to get along with others, learn how to not be obnoxious. If you have main character syndrome, hopefully, you learn how to avoid that.
Hmm. That has close to home.
um, and from there, the world is your oyster. Learn how to make great games. Never stop learning new things, and then eventually, and maybe this is the goal for everyone in this room, or maybe a few of us, get a job being able to make something you're proud of. Um, I think the first five, this is just reiterating what I just said, are basically where most of us are at here. If any of you have any ideas of how to find a job, please let me know because I'm still working on that. So I'll start with this. I'm going to make a very specific argument here. You have to start small, and you have to start making really, really shitty games. Now, some of you who are especially prone to wanting to make everything perfect will be like, "What? Hold on, just a moment. I don't want to make anything shitty."
That is too close to home again.
A 40-hour minimum for playable characters,
Exactly.
different worlds and travel
Now,
Skyrim 6.
I
um,
want in a super realistic physics, but also compelling character and story and gameplay. Imagine Gmod.
make it in Gmod, yeah. Breath of the Wild 3, as it were.
By myself.
By yourself. Um, there's a little demon. I don't know if you see him. Yeah, he's the one whispering you all of these things. And I think you would all do well to unlearn those very, very bad thoughts, because essentially what you're doing is sabotaging your own learning and robbing yourself of the opportunity to make yourself feel good about what you're making. So, in other words, I don't think you should make bad games, not low effort games. I think you need to start very, very small in scope. Pong, asteroids, Bubble Bobble, things like that. And then work your way up in complexity. So by the time you've made a handful of games, you can limit the sort of new things that you come up with to things you know are possible. So when do you know you are ready to start a more complex project? What does that look like? It starts with an idea. How do you go from what is on the left there to what's on the right? That's Dwarf
I
Fortress.
knew it. I knew it. Half the board.
It's it's made up of ASCII characters. It's all like a 2D representation, but if you've never heard of that, it's essentially what Minecraft is in 3D, but in two dimensions. Did you have a question?
No more a comment. You could go even simpler than that. You can do it entirely in console text.
Hey.
Anything else with your first idea, it can just be a bunch of branching decisions in the console.
I think that's a great piece of advice, especially for all of us who are interested in more story-oriented games. Um, just do like simple conditional statements and then display more text. Very, very simple to do. Okay. So how do you go from something like Dwarf Fortress to something like Minecraft? Well, okay, this is going to be a little bit of a complex topic here, but I'm just going to explain the whole thing. You have your idea, right? And you have to see if it's actually viable, right? That's your pre-production. That's when you're going to communicate with other people. You're going to make a very simple prototype, um, and you're going to pitch it to other people. You're going to show it to them, and you're going to get very, very rapid feedback. There's basically two parts to this whole process. The one where you fuck around, and then the one where you find out. That's a joke, but I do mean that sincerely. You do have to sort of let go of your ego a little bit and see, okay, all right, I have this idea. Let's see if it's even good. And that means testing it, and getting feedback from it. Even just takes one person, really, to be like, actually, I think this is a bad idea. So the whole process can sort of be broken down into milestones, which is what's on that top row, and the sort of stages of production, right? So, a minimum viable product, right? That is you saying, okay, I have this prototype. I know that it's kind of fun, but it's not exactly what I envisioned. So let's make it closer to what I envisioned. It's the minimum you need to communicate every um, part of your vision. You don't have to have good art. You don't have to have writing or sound or anything. Just prove that it works um, good enough. And then once you have that, you can move on to another stage that I call content production. And content production is basically, okay, I know this works, right? So we have, I don't know, 6 weeks, and we know it takes 1 week to make a really solid level. Okay, so we can make about 6 levels in that time. So that requires finishing up making any miscellaneous programming tasks, finishing up characters, and then from there, once you have a complete game, your job is to polish it, is to make it feel like a game, add feedback, add music, add better art, and then eventually you have a game you can release. Um, here's um, here's sort of what that looked like for Minecraft. Well, okay, so I don't know the exact origins of where Notch got the idea, but I do know he was inspired by games like Infiniminer and Dwarf Fortress. So in the early days, the pre-alpha, he just tried to figure out like how do I generate these meshes, right? And then later on, he was eventually able to add terrain generation infinitely. And
What's MVP?
minimum viable product. Huh? Oh, right. I'll talk about vertical slices in a moment. Um, yes.
Like, so, look at this, it's beyond minimal, it's the least amount of stuff you need, like, not even like the minimum to do your complete game, like for Mario, you just need blocks that jump and move to the right, nothing more, that just pare it down so much that it's only the course.
Mhm. Um, minimum viable products are often contrasted with this idea of a vertical slice. So imagine like cutting through like a slice of fruit, right? Um, everything is there, like what you would expect. So when you make a vertical slice, what you're doing is making a very, very small, very tightly focused experience on every single aspect of the game polished to a release level. And that basically means it can stand on its own. You can share it with others to demonstrate that like you know what you're doing as a developer or a designer. And that is um, that's something you may want when you're pitching it to say investors or Kickstarter campaign.
Mhm.
But minimum viable products are useful at this stage because they tell you, okay, this is an idea that we can actually develop further. Um, but to go back to the bless you, to go back to the Minecraft example, so what did that look like for Minecraft? Well, basically, it's when all of the terrain generation was there, when the monsters and the very basic mechanics were there, and so the rest of the beta development for Minecraft was to make more of that, right? So that's when they added all the extra animals, all of the cosmetic features that we know. They changed the lighting system and so forth. And then eventually we got the full release of the game on every console known to man, even the 3DS.
Yeah.
um, so I hope you can see why this is a useful framework to talk about, like, or to think about the whole development process as a whole. Um, and this is just a little bit of a summary of that. Come up with an idea, see if it even works, get feedback very fast, um, and then try to make something that demonstrates that it works. And then once you have something that you want more of, you just add more to it until you're satisfied. You can make it pretty, you can make it feel good, and you can release it. Um, this is sort of what I was talking about by the fuck around and find out idea. Um, you have to constantly be asking yourself, okay, so it's hard enough to make art, it's hard enough to make programming work the way you want it to. Is this even a good idea in the first place? That's not to make you feel like insecure or anything, but oftentimes the point of games are to make something fun, right? What's up? Yeah.
Marginalized groups get stuck in some hospital policy laws.
Yeah.
Not like you're saying, like recognized early on.
Mm. Right, right. And oftentimes you will have to completely rework a system. That's okay. That's why we start from something that is just good enough to solve the problem in the minimum possible way, so that when we do have to go back, and we will, we're not going to have to do that much more work. And that's also why you don't start with art typically. I understand that as designers, you may want to, and in fact, if your whole point of your game is you're making a novel art style, that's something you could absolutely do. That's totally valid. Um, but I would urge you to make sure that, like, at least you know that it is possible. Um, does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Okay. So this actually brings us back to that idea of MVP. Prototyping. The very first thing you want to do once you have your idea and you've communicated a little bit is you want to make sure it's fun for 30 seconds, because your game loop is just going to be the same thing over and over again. 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes. On the right, we have pictures of the first prototypes of Subnautica. And this is where I first heard this idea that,
That looks familiar.
yeah, it looks like shit, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, terrible, awful, evil, right? It's uh you don't want to release a game like that. But it is very useful in the early stages to see, like, okay, so we have these mechanics, we have I don't know, stuff you collect, a submarine, right? Does that all work together? And if not, you can very easily rework it. Um, and that brings us to planning. So we want something we can work with others with. Um, Task tracking software is super, super useful in this respect. Your Trello boards, your GitHub issues, if you know how to use those. The point is, you want to make a bunch of small tasks that are related to each other, or sorry, unrelated to each other. Um, so you can work on them, and then eventually, once you have enough of these tasks done, you have a build that you can show people. Um, and then, of course, there's all these things about organizing them by, like, how hard they are, how much time and effort and priority. Um, all depends on the project. And then everybody's favorite, version control. So if you've never heard of version control software like Git or GitHub, this is what will turn you from a mortal to a wizard. You get to control time in a very literal sense, um, which sounds scary, but it's actually quite easy when you think about it like this. You set checkpoints for anything that you change. So, I submit something to my main version, and that is a checkpoint I can always go back to, right? It's useful for programming. I'm sure if you do a lot of, like, really complex art, where, I don't know, maybe the layers that you're working with, you want to go back to a very specific version of it, that would also be useful for you. um, but this is just another tool in our tool belt to work with other people. Um, and I want to talk about the two main parts of production and where your focus and everything should be. So for prototyping, you should focus on systems and mechanics as a foundation for everything else. This happens oftentimes in group projects and game jams. People will jump to things that they're not ready for, right? You can't put art in a game that doesn't exist, if that makes sense. Um, and scope is demonstrated by actually trying stuff. Um, I know I said earlier plagiarism doesn't exist. this is actually a very, very good opportunity in the early stages to just copy someone else's work, to follow a tutorial line by line and be like, okay, this is what you're doing. Okay. And then you get a third of the way through it and you're like, I don't like this anymore. I'm going to change it completely. And then you get ideas for a completely new game. Uh, so focus in production. Um, you are building off of, like I said, your foundation. And the scope is basically you have to plan at that point, right? I hope you can understand why like planning during prototyping doesn't really make any sense. Like you can plan in the sense of like I'm going to try something, but you can't plan out like 10 levels with like mechanics that don't even exist yet. um, and then mentality. During prototyping, you should be playful, exploratory, see what works, see what doesn't. Production, that's when you just roll your sleeves up and you get to work. Feedback during prototyping should be very, very fast. And actually, once you have a MVP, at that point, during production, feedback can be more spaced out. Say week to week instead of minute to minute. Um, Try having like a monthly playable build. And at that point, you're focused on, how does it feel? Looking for bugs, seeing if everything works together. And this is sort of what I was alluding to before. A lot of game jams, a lot of group projects in classes, they don't teach you this stuff. So um, I hope that like a lot of you guys can sort of take this advice to heart. Um, right off the bat, you cannot do any planning, right? If you don't have anything to plan with, um, getting no feedback, uh, especially in the early stages, completely fatal, right? Why would you put effort and energy into something you don't even know is going anywhere? Well, that's the nice thing about community and friends and classmates is you can show them, hey, here's this thing I made. Great. I like it. I like this part. I don't like this other part. Cool. Thank you for letting me know. I'll work on that. Um, and then also just getting stuck in that constant loop of like, oh, I've got to make this better. I got to make this better. Well, at some point, if you want to like finish something, you can't do that. Um, and then during production, sort of the flip side of that coin is you will get lost if you don't do any planning. If you polish endlessly, if you don't have a time, this is really important. In software engineering, this was everything for us. The deadline. That class had 3 projects, and we knew the deadline first thing. That was like the most important thing because all of our milestones developed from that date. And then we get to sort of more nuanced. I kind of touched on this before, but how do you know when you switched? And I think for me, this may be different for everybody, is if you know like you have something that you want more of, then you can just make more of it. Um, and then the question becomes, well, what if we turn that whole framework on its head? What if you have a very asset heavy game like a JRPG? Well, think of all of the art and programming you need in a JRPG versus an arcade game. What's going to be the planning that you and your team have to do uh, ahead of time, right? You have to take all those things into consideration. And so that's where it becomes very valuable to have a pretty good understanding of what makes various genres of games um, unique and what defines them. Um, and I also just want to reiterate that this is all stuff that I've thought about a lot from seeing a lot of jams and class projects not go very well. Um, and this doesn't really apply to commercial games, but it might. Um, I don't know. Um, and of course, a lot of this just comes down to managing complexity. It's a very complex thing. Um, and then the last few things here. Um, a lot of this, I sort of joked before, don't have main character syndrome, but that's sort of the whole thing is you're learning to make stuff for other people. Language and games, they're not for us. We may feel like they're for us, but they're actually to communicate with other people. So be courageous in what you know and what you don't know, and appreciate the process of learning, because that will make things a lot more sustainable in the long run than wanting to have your name on a project or a product. Um, Learning not to be obnoxious is one of the most important skills you can learn. I'm sure each one of us has our own quirks and our own, ways of doing things. But if we want to work with others, we have to meet them where they're at, right? And um, do the same, or hope that they do the same for us. Learn how GitHub works, especially for you guys that are in CD. I know it's scary. I will literally sit down with you whenever you ask, and I will tell you exactly how GitHub works. Please ask me. I beg you to ask me to show you how to use it. It is such a powerful piece of software once you actually understand, oh, that's what a git ignore is. That's what like, making these checkpoints is all about. Um,
We did a presentation on that last semester, and we can probably do it again in future, maybe next fall. But we'll get back to you on that. But yeah, please ask us any questions about anything. Personally, if you guys want help on planning your projects, if you're at that stage, I am available to help you figure out what goals you need to meet, what do you actually need to do, and make a little plan for it.
Thank you. And we're all here to help each other. I think cultivating an ethic of wanting to see everyone here succeed is something we should all aspire to.
That's
Um, yeah, and learn how to communicate. That's like the other really important thing.
feedback ASAP.
Oh,
That's a really if you're stuck for more than an hour on one thing, and like you've been searching and Googling for that whole hour trying to find a solution, you gotta ask for help. 1 hour, set a time limit for yourself for how long you're gonna search, because at a certain point it becomes fruitless and you get really frustrated and you stop working.
that's an insanely good piece of advice.
Ask for help.
1 hour, just 1 hour
Yep,
to work on
set a
it.
time limit.
If you can't figure it out, just ask.
Just ask. There are so many people here who may even have like the right article for you. Just send you to it exactly. So
Um, let's see. Right. Okay. The other thing is, finishing a game is like one of the hardest things you can possibly do. So don't make it more difficult for yourself than it needs to be. Don't make yourself a loner. If you can work with others and divide labor, in a way that is, fair to both of you, that's great. Um, do whatever you have to do to complete this very, very hard task. Obviously, don't like cheat or lie or do anything like that. Um, but if you enjoy expressing yourself, if you enjoy solving problems and, waking up today and learning something more than you knew yesterday, you're going to have a great time with this hobby because it's all learning new things. It's all trying things out. And yeah, just try to have fun with it. Uh, this is a really important thing when it comes to setting deadlines. This is Parkinson's law. I think it was like a Navy guy. He was like, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So yes.
Based on anything, like any research or anything, but my mom will always say projects take about 3 times as long as you think they're gonna take.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. This is sort of about mentality, right? Think of all of the projects or assignments that you should have started earlier on, but you didn't, and then it took longer than you thought. That's sort of what this is saying. Um, do your due diligence and just think about it. Um, This is sort of the justification for setting milestones and then thinking about everything in accordance with those. All right, and then we're at the last portion of this presentation. I have some discussion questions for all of you guys. Um, what's the biggest challenge you faced when trying to make a game? How did you approach solving it?
If you want, playtest, I made a game of the, semi-hostile format of different text safe. So every single time I try to get some place. Oh, you just slam it.
Sure, thank you.
And I don't have a solution for it.
Hmm.
So far I've just tried a couple of times.
Sorry, could you repeat the question there or the statement?
Uh, that's- What's the word? My statement is the biggest challenge I've faced is getting to play testing in a somewhat